Have you ever noticed how some people keep trying to negotiate with forces that are actively destroying them? Manage it, minimize it, hope it goes away on its own. And then they wonder why the same problem keeps returning, stronger each time, like a wound that never quite heals because you keep picking at it instead of letting the surgeon do what needs to be done. Now imagine if you understood what Machiavelli knew 5 centuries ago, that half measures don't just fail, they make everything worse. That's where the real lesson begins. You have been taught to be merciful, to turn the other cheek, to believe that kindness conquers all, that if you just give people enough chances, they'll eventually see reason and change their ways. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this brutal clarity. Your mercy is being weaponized against you, and the more forgiving you are with those who mean you harm, the more you teach them that harming you has no real consequences. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people refuse to acknowledge. He said, injuries must be inflicted all at once, so that their ill savor may be lessened by repetition. Read that again. Not because Machiavelli was cruel, but because he was clear. He observed that when you wound someone gradually, day after day, small cut after small cut, you create a permanent enemy. Someone who never forgets. Someone who catalogues every slight and waits for their moment. But when you strike once, decisively, completely, you either eliminate the threat or you establish such clear dominance that the threat never emerges again. Do you know why most people fail at this? Because they confuse aggression with decisiveness. They think Machiavelli was advocating for constant violence, for being a tyrant, but that's not it at all. He was warning against the middle path, the one where you're threatening enough to create resentment, but not decisive enough to prevent retaliation. The one where you wound your enemy just enough to make them hate you, but leave them strong enough to plot revenge. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. And one of the darkest shadows we carry is our capacity for ruthlessness. Not cruelty for its own sake, but the willingness to do what is necessary when necessary. Most people spend their lives running from this part of themselves. They convince themselves that being spiritual or evolved means never acknowledging that sometimes, in this world, you have to be willing to crush what threatens you. But here's what happens when you keep managing threats instead of eliminating them. That co-worker who undermines you. You manage them by trying to stay professional, by documenting everything, by hoping HR will handle it. Meanwhile, they're poisoning your reputation one conversation at a time. That toxic friend who only calls when they need something. You manage them by slowly reducing contact, by making excuses, by hoping they'll get the hint. But they don't. They just learn to be more manipulative. That boundary-violating family member, you manage them by limiting visits, by keeping conversations surface level, by trying to maintain peace. And every holiday becomes a performance of exhaustion. This is the psychology of the half measure, and it's destroying you from the inside out, because every time you choose to manage rather than eliminate, you're making a silent agreement with yourself. My peace is negotiable. My boundaries are suggestions. My well-being can wait until it's convenient for everyone else. Machiavelli wasn't writing a manual for sadists. He was writing a survival guide for people living in a world where power dynamics are real, where threats don't disappear because you ignore them, and where your kindness will be mistaken for weakness by those who think in terms of dominance and submission. The question isn't whether you're comfortable with this reality. The question is, how long will you keep pretending it doesn't exist while it systematically dismantles everything you've built? Let's go deeper into what Machiavelli actually understood about human psychology, something that connects directly to Jung's concept of projection and the games people play with power. When someone becomes your enemy, whether in business, relationships, or life, something psychological happens that most people miss. They don't just oppose you, they begin constructing an entire narrative about who you are. In their mind, you become the villain of their story, Every action you take gets filtered through this lens. Your kindness becomes manipulation. Your silence becomes arrogance. Your success becomes evidence of your treachery. Jung called this projection, the mechanism through which people attribute to you what they cannot face in themselves. But here's the cruelest point that Machiavelli recognized. Once this narrative is established, no amount of goodwill changes it. You cannot negotiate with someone's projection of you. You cannot reason with their story, because they need you to be the villain. It justifies their resentment, excuses their behavior, and gives meaning to their suffering. Your very existence as anything other than what they've decided you are becomes a threat to their psychological stability. So what do most people do? They try to prove themselves. They attempt to show the enemy that they're not who the enemy thinks they are. They offer olive branches. They suggest compromises. They try to work it out. And every single one of these attempts does the exact opposite of what you intend. It doesn't soften your enemy. It reveals your weakness. It doesn't create reconciliation. It creates opportunity for further attack. Machiavelli observed this pattern in the political theater of Renaissance Italy, where princes who tried to be half merciful ended up dead, while those who struck decisively and completely either won or at least bought themselves time. But the same psychology applies to your life right now. That person spreading rumors about you at work. Every time you try to clear the air, you give them more ammunition. That ex who keeps finding ways to destabilize your life. Every response you give feeds their need for relevance in your world. That competitor who's trying to sabotage your business. Every olive branch you extend is interpreted as fear. The truth is darker than most self-help content will admit. There are people in your life right now who will never wish you well. Not because of something you did, but because of what your success represents to their failure. Not because you hurt them, but because your happiness highlights their misery. Not because you're their enemy, but because they've cast you in that role and they need the story to make sense of their own life. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But there's a flip side to this wisdom. Sometimes what irritates others about you is simply that you exist outside their control. And no amount of self-reflection on your part will change their need to diminish you. This is where Machiavelli's insight becomes psychologically liberating rather than morally troubling. He's not telling you to go out and harm people. He's telling you that when someone has revealed themselves to be a genuine threat, not just a disagreement, not just a personality clash, but an actual enemy who is actively working against your well-being, your half-hearted attempts to manage them are making everything worse. Think about it. When you fire someone but let them stay for 2 more weeks, those 2 weeks often become sabotage. When you break up with someone but stay friends, that friendship often becomes a breeding ground for manipulation. When you cut ties with a toxic family member but still attend every gathering, those gatherings become battlegrounds where you're constantly on defense. The psychology here is critical. Maintaining contact with an enemy trains them to be better enemies. Every time you show them your boundaries and they cross them without consequence, they learn exactly how far they can push. Every time you reveal your pain and they use it against you, they map your vulnerabilities. Every time you seek peace and they exploit your desire for harmony, they refine their strategy. Freud understood this through his concept of the repetition compulsion, the way we unconsciously recreate painful patterns. But what he didn't emphasize enough is that sometimes we're not the only ones trapped in the pattern. Sometimes we're keeping our enemies close because we're afraid of what full separation would mean. We're afraid of being seen as harsh, as unforgiving, as not evolved enough to handle conflict with grace. But here's what nobody tells you. Grace is not the same as tolerance. Wisdom is not the same as passivity. Spiritual maturity is not the same as letting people walk all over you while you smile and meditate on compassion. Sometimes the most conscious, evolved, spiritually mature thing you can do is recognize that someone is poison and remove them from your life completely, decisively, and without explanation. Machiavelli's ruthlessness wasn't pathological. It was phenomenological. He observed what actually happens in power dynamics, not what we wish would happen. He saw that the person who tries to be loved by everyone ends up respected by no one. That the leader who can't make hard decisions creates chaos for everyone under their care. That mercy shown to those who don't value it becomes weakness exploited by those who do understand power. Are you ready to deal with what this means for your life? Are you ready to look at the people you're currently managing and ask yourself the honest question, is this person actually going to change? Or am I just maintaining a comfortable fiction while they continue to drain my energy, damage my reputation, and limit my growth? Because it is precisely in facing this uncomfortable question that a new kind of power emerges. Not the power of domination, but the power of decisiveness. Not the power of cruelty, but the power of clarity. And that is what we will talk about now. So how do you actually implement Machiavelli's wisdom without becoming the villain you're trying to protect yourself from? How do you crush your enemies without crushing your own soul in the process? This is where ancient ruthlessness meets modern psychology, and where the real transformation begins. First, you need to understand the distinction Machiavelli was making, and it's more nuanced than most people realize. He wasn't saying to go around destroying people preemptively. He wasn't advocating for paranoid aggression. He was saying that once someone has clearly revealed themselves to be an active threat, your response needs to be proportional to the actual danger, not to your hope that they'll magically become reasonable. Carl Jung talked about the process of individuation, becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, including the shadow. And part of your shadow is your capacity for ruthlessness. Not in the sense of enjoying harm, but in the sense of being willing to do what protects you even when it's uncomfortable, even when people will judge you, even when it means you'll be misunderstood. Here's what this looks like in practice. Stop announcing your boundaries. Enforce them. Most people make the mistake of warning their enemies. If you do that one more time, I'm going to... And what does the enemy hear? I haven't actually decided to protect myself yet, so I'll give you one more chance to figure out exactly where my breaking point is. Machiavelli understood that real power doesn't announce itself. It demonstrates itself. When someone crosses a boundary, the consequence should be immediate, clear, and non-negotiable. No three-strike system. No, let's talk about this. The boundary is enforced because it exists, period. Cut completely, not gradually. This is where most people fail. They think they're being mature by slowly distancing themselves from toxic people. But what you're actually doing is teaching them to adapt to your new boundaries while maintaining their position in your life. It's like trying to quit smoking by reducing from 20 cigarettes to 15, then 10, then 5. The addiction persists because the connection persists. When you've determined that someone is genuinely harmful to your well-being, the cut needs to be complete. Block the number. Remove from social media. Stop attending the same events if possible. No, just checking in. No happy birthday texts. No breadcrumbs of connection that they can use to wiggle back in. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting and uncomfortable. The reason most people can't do this isn't because they're too kind. It's because they're attached to being seen as kind. Jung would say you're too identified with your persona, the mask you wear that says, I'm the person who gives people chances. I'm the person who believes in redemption. I'm the person who never gives up on anyone. But that persona is not you. It's a role you're playing, and the role is costing you your peace, your energy, and your progress. The question is, are you willing to be misunderstood as harsh in order to protect yourself? Are you willing to have people call you cold because you refuse to be warm toward those who burn you? Are you willing to lose the approval of those who only approved of you when you were easier to manipulate? Make your moves invisible until they're irreversible. This is pure Machiavelli, but it's also deeply practical psychology. When you've decided that someone needs to be removed from your sphere of influence, don't announce it. Don't explain it. Don't give them time to mount a counter-offensive or play the victim to your mutual connections. Just do it. If you're firing someone, have security ready. If you're ending a partnership, have your lawyer ready. If you're cutting off a family member, have your support system ready. The decision should be final before they know the decision has been made. This isn't about being sneaky. It's about being effective, because here's what happens when you telegraph your moves. People who are invested in manipulating you will escalate. They'll love bomb you. They'll play victim. They'll get others involved. They'll create drama that makes you doubt yourself. But when it's already done, cleanly and completely, there's nothing to negotiate, nothing to explain, nothing to manage. It's simply over. Use their attacks to strengthen your position. This is the Aikido of Machiavellian thinking. When an enemy attacks you, especially publicly or professionally, don't defend. Document, don't react emotionally. Prepare. Because the enemy who attacks you openly has just given you something valuable. Evidence. Every email they send in anger, every rumor they spread, every boundary they violate. These are not just attacks. They're the rope they're weaving to hang themselves with. Jung understood that what we resist persists. So don't resist their attacks. Allow them. Let them reveal exactly who they are to everyone watching. Stay calm, stay factual, stay clean in your own conduct, and when the right moment comes, when they've built up enough evidence of their own character, you present it all at once. To HR, to your mutual friends, to your family, to the court if necessary, not as revenge, but as defense. Not as attack, but as truth. But, and this is critical, you must be willing to actually do this. Most people collect evidence but never use it because they're still hoping for reconciliation. They're still addicted to the fantasy that somehow, if they just find the right words, the right approach, the enemy will suddenly see reason. This is the opposite of Machiavellian thinking. This is magical thinking, and it will keep you trapped. Understand that decisiveness is mercy, just not for your enemy. Here's the reframe that might help you psychologically. When you eliminate a threat decisively, you're being merciful to everyone else in the system. To yourself, to your family, to your colleagues, to your real friends, to future versions of you who won't have to keep fighting the same battle. The person you're cutting off, they'll find another target, they'll rebuild, they'll move on. But if you keep them close, you guarantee ongoing suffering for yourself and everyone connected to you. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But I'll add to this, it's better to be respected than liked, and respect doesn't come from how nice you are. It comes from how clearly you protect what matters to you, from how decisively you respond to threats, from how completely you follow through on your boundaries. Now here comes the part that will test you. When you actually start implementing this, when you cut people off completely, when you enforce boundaries without negotiation, when you respond to attacks with documentary evidence rather than emotional defense, you will be called things: cold, calculating, unforgiving, harsh. Some version of they've changed and not in a good way. And this is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes your anchor, because what's actually happening is that you're stepping out of the role others assigned you. You're no longer playing the part of the one who absorbs abuse with a smile. You're no longer available to be the emotional punching bag, the convenient scapegoat, the person who can always be counted on to fold under pressure. This transformation is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone true, the version of you that was always there but was suppressed by your need to be accepted, approved of, liked, And yes, that version is harder, more boundaried, less available for nonsense, more protective of its energy, less willing to explain itself. But here's what nobody tells you about this path. You don't just gain protection, you gain respect, you gain peace, you gain time, you gain energy. You gain the kind of relationships where people don't test your boundaries because they can sense you're not someone who tolerates boundary violation. When you finally implement Machiavelli's wisdom, when you stop managing your enemies and start eliminating them from your sphere of influence, something shifts in the entire architecture of your life. First comes the silence, and it's uncomfortable. Because where there was once drama, there's now peace. Where there was once chaos, there's now calm. And your nervous system, which has been conditioned to operate in crisis mode, doesn't quite know what to do with this new reality. You might even find yourself creating problems where none exist, just because the absence of enemies feels unfamiliar. But gradually, this silence transforms. It becomes the space where you can finally hear yourself think, where you can build instead of constantly defending, where you can create instead of constantly repairing. Then comes the clarity. You begin to see how much energy you are spending on threat management, how many hours lost to rumination about people who are actively working against you, how much creative potential was being drained into defensive strategies. And you realize, I wasn't being kind by tolerating them, I was being afraid. Afraid of being seen as the villain, afraid of making waves, afraid of standing alone if necessary. But Carl Jung was right when he said that individuation requires you to distance yourself from the collective, to walk alone for a while. And when you crush your enemies, by removing them completely from your life, you're not becoming isolated. You're becoming selective. You're creating space for real allies, for people who don't need to be managed because they're not threats to begin with. The people you lose in this process, they reveal that they were never really with you. They were with the version of you that was easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to diminish. And now that you've decided to protect yourself decisively, they don't know what to do with you. Good. Let them be confused. Let them call you changed. Because you have changed. You've stopped being available for your own destruction. Machiavelli's wisdom, when properly understood and integrated, doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. It doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. It doesn't make you a tyrant. It makes you sovereign over your own life, your own energy, your own peace. And here's the final truth. The people who matter, the real ones, they'll respect this. They'll see that you've stopped letting yourself be destroyed, and they'll appreciate that you're now someone who can be counted on to protect what matters, including them. Because someone who won't protect themselves certainly can't protect anyone else. So are you ready to stop managing your enemies and start crushing them, not with violence, but with decisive removal? Not with hatred, but with clarity? Are you ready to be misunderstood as harsh by those who benefited from your weakness? Are you ready to walk alone if necessary, knowing that real strength doesn't need constant company to validate itself? Today, we learned from Niccolò Machiavelli that half measures in dealing with threats only create stronger enemies, and from Carl Jung that true individuation requires us to integrate even our capacity for ruthlessness. Not as cruelty, but as clarity. We discovered that protecting yourself decisively isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's about recognizing that your peace, your energy, and your future are worth more than maintaining comfortable fictions about people who are actively working against you. If these insights sparked a moment of clarity for you, hit the like button to share this wisdom with others who might be trapped in the cycle of managing rather than eliminating their enemies. Subscribe to join our community where we dive deeper into life-changing ideas every week. Ideas that don't just sound good, but actually transform how we see ourselves and navigate power dynamics in the real world. Write in the comments, "I choose decisive action," if you're ready to stop managing threats and start eliminating them from your sphere of influence. Let's see how many here understand that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to be completely uncompromising with those who mean you harm. And don't forget, keep watching the next video where we'll explore another uncomfortable truth that most people avoid. Why your need to be understood is the very thing keeping you trapped. Trust me, it's going to challenge everything you think about communication and connection. Until we meet again, carry these insights forward with the understanding that wisdom is not always gentle, but it is always true. And sometimes, the most evolved thing you can do is recognize when mercy becomes self-destruction, and choose yourself instead. Wishing you moments of clarity, decisive action, and the courage to protect what you've built until our next video. May Machiavelli's ruthless clarity and Jung's psychological wisdom remind us that being whole sometimes means being willing to be misunderstood. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational, and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.